Too much. You guys probably can figure out why.
Yeah.
But I definitely want to use the mic as much as I can. So. Good evening, church. How we doing? Good. All right. We're doing well? Yeah. Great to be here. Great to see all of you. Great to see that the communication and announcements and parking maps and all that has gotten us all here. So. I did want to just lift up the music ministry for Friday night and the bonfire. That was amazing, guys. You guys did an amazing job. It was awesome. I think what was cool about it was I think over half the people that were there are not part of our church, and it was an amazing turnout. And the people that hosted us, they loved it. They loved it and thought it was great. And they're like, you can use this whenever you want. You let us know, we'll make it happen. And so I think we actually might even have our pumpkin chucking there as well. So that was a lot of fun on Friday night. It wasn't even, it was cold, but I don't know if we felt cold. Because, obviously there's a fire, but it's just singing to God. It warms the heart, warms the soul. So we are going to continue in our the book of Daniel today. Before we do that, there's an update on our special contribution for 5,000 of what we give goes to Indonesia, and the rest stays here locally. This is what helps us hire Mitchell and things like that. So a big reason Mitchell's here is because of our special contribution and helping locally. So that's where we're at. And our goal last year again was 20. We smashed it, and so I was like, you know what? Let's go for 22,000 this year. So just a little bit of faith, and we'll see what God does. And so we will celebrate our mission contribution, our special contribution on, like Michael said, on the 30th of October with our Mission Sunday. So, today we are going to go through a really, really, really special time in the book of Daniel, and we're going to be in Daniel 3. We've been journeying through Daniel. We're going to continue the journey through Daniel for the rest of the year. But what we're reading today, it's actually, children's ministry should actually be down here. Because this is one of the most known stories in the Bible. It's the story of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and the fiery furnace. You guys know this one?
Yeah.
Oh, I had a hunch that you might. Just a hunch. I had a hunch that many of you knew this story. But my hunch was that many of you know this story because, I don't know, there's like talking vegetables as you imagine the story. Things like that. And so you're picturing like a tomato and a cucumber and being put in the fiery furnace. How did vegetables not burn? Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Or maybe if you're a little bit before that time, maybe it's like one of those cardboard like kids books that you open the page and it like pops up and you like pull the little tab and it like moves in and out. We have one at home that I meant to bring, but that's just the reality of America and Christianity in America. But this story, there's a reason that the children are down here is because this is not a child's story.
Mom.
This is not a child's play at all, actually. It's a very dangerous story. It's an extremely explosive story. And the focus of this story, it is not child's play whatsoever. It's actually a really uncomfortable story. Because what this story focuses on, two things. And you're never supposed to bring up in polite conversation the two things that this story actually attacks. And that's politics and religion, right? I don't think we're supposed to talk about those two things. Those are like big no-nos. You're in the barber shop. No, not even there. And I don't go to the barber shop, so maybe that's changed. Those things were brought up in the barber shop. They're not brought up, at the restaurant, hanging out with the guys watching the football game. It's not spoken of at the fancy football drafts that we all have, or when you're getting your nails done, or just hanging out at the dinner table. It's just family gatherings. No, we're not talking about those two topics. Right? Those topics are just don't talk about them. Just leave them alone. So here's what I want to do. Since the talking vegetables are very crisp in our mind right now, and because the cardboard books might be very fresh in our mind, they've kind of hijacked this story. They've hijacked it for us in our culture. And so I just want to put an image in front of you that I think will just kind of shake us up and kind of awaken us a little bit and help us realize that the stakes are very, very, extremely high when it comes to this story. And so you're going to see a picture of two individuals here. One you'll definitely know. Immediately you'll know that on my right is Adolf Hitler. But the man on the left, who is that? Many of you don't know, maybe some of you do know. Does anyone happen to know who that man is on the left? Anyone? Okay. See, on the left is a man, his name is Baldur. Baldur Ben Shryak, right? And Baldur, that's his first name, he was the ideal German youth. He joined and enrolled in the service of the Nazi Party when he was 18 years old, and within 8 years, by the time he was in his mid-20s, he was the head and architect of Hitler's youth. Hitler used, it was a program to just indoctrinate a whole generation of youth into the ideology of the Nazi government, and so he was the architect of that. That's Baldur right there, right? And he was very, very successful at it. He was extremely successful at it. He was elevated to the state secretary, and so he was actually a very personal, close counselor of Adolf Hitler. So before World War II, there's actually this famous interview that the London Times does with Baldur. And here are some of the words, some of the final words of that interview that really are very hauntingly echoed in Europe years after this interview, after the years went by. And this is what he says in this interview. He says, "One cannot be a German and at the same time deny God. But an arousal of faith in the eternal German is at the same time an arousal of faith in the eternal God. If we act as true Germans, we act accordingly to the laws of God. Whoever serves Adolf Hitler, the Fuhrer, serves Germany, and whoever serves Germany serves God." Wow. Wow. Well, thanks for letting us know what you think, Mr. Baldur. That makes me cringe to read that. It makes me cringe inside knowing that these ideas, 10 years after these words were said, millions and millions and millions of people are dead with words like that. You know, and there's probably a reason we're all silent after you read something like that. We start thinking about what's transpired. There's something horrifying that happened here, where one particular tribe or nation values their culture, their state, religion, and their ideology above the heavens, above God. This is the kind of idolatry of national identity that leads to horror and evil in our world. This is what Daniel 3 is about, and Daniel 3 is horrifying. Daniel 3 is a chapter about the human idolatry of their own national identity of Babylon. And so what are God's people to do in a situation like this? This is not a children's story at all. So, Miami God Church, welcome to Daniel 3. So let's go ahead and dig in, okay? So, Daniel 3, starting in verse 1. Here we go. It says, "King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon." And I just want to stop right there. How big is this thing? How big is this thing? If you look at your footnotes are in the Bible, it's going to say how big it is. This thing is how big, Miss Tracy? There you go. Come on, footnotes. Footnotes are really helpful. 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. That's how big that is. So we've been reading through the book of Daniel, and you know we've had our 7-week series, right? 7-week reading plan as a church. And so we all know what happened before Daniel 3. We all know Daniel 2 happened, right? We all know that, right? Yeah, Daniel 2 happened. Right? And so in Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar, he has this dream of this huge statue. And this statue, it's a symbol of kingdoms, of national power, a whole train of kingdoms. His is the head, it's the head of gold, and Nebuchadnezzar, yeah, he's that kingdom, the gold kingdom. And so this statue in Daniel 3, it's an embodiment of the king of the Babylonian Empire, of its gods, okay? So what's this statue is portraying? It's portraying human kingdoms and their exaltation of their own power in the forms or image of this statue. And so here's the thing that I thought about is I thought about statues, right? And I'm like, there's a lot of things about statues and idolizing and bowing down to statues in the Bible. There's the golden calf, there's this, there's other situations, right? And I thought, that's so primitive. And then I thought, oh, wait a second, that's not a good thought. That's not a good thought at all. Because I had to remind myself that at this exact moment in the Hudson River stands a statue that's actually way bigger than the statue we read about in Daniel 3. And what is this an embodiment of? It's an embodiment of a national value of our particular kingdom or nation. And here's the thing, I'm not saying it's bad at all. I'm not saying it's bad. My kids talk about it all the time. Weston every day prays and thanks God for the Statue of Liberty. He does. He does. He's like, when are we going to the Statue of Liberty, God? So I'm not saying this is a bad thing at all. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying this is a modern thing as well. It's not a primitive thing. I had to think about this because I thought, that doesn't happen anymore. And then I was like, wait a sec. My son prays about this. Thanks God for the Statue. So anyways, but moving on into Daniel, in verse 2, it says, he then summoned the satraps. I like that. I don't know when I think of satraps, I think of like some little kind of rodent, like in, I don't know, Madagascar or something like that. Satraps. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before it. Then the herald, interesting, they have a herald, loudly proclaiming. What's this herald doing? This herald's evangelizing from Babylon. Okay? So, no different than what we're called to do in spreading the good news. This herald loudly proclaimed nations and peoples of every language. So there's nations there. There's people of every language there. This is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, that's a fun one, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of the gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, and all the kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Okay, so what is happening is there is a nation exalting its own power to a place of the gods. It's Nebuchadnezzar, it's the gods, it's their military power, it's their way of life, it's their culture. And so it's not just about that they go and sing praise songs and bow down, it's that they give allegiance and that they recognize that Babylon defines reality. Babylon gets to define what's right and wrong. Babylon defines what success and failure is, and because of that, Babylon is God. And so now Israel was called to never make an image of anything from heaven. To do so would be to take some image available within creation, a created thing, and to treat it as if it's the creator. Okay? So it's to blur the distinction between creator and creation, and creature, creator and creature. That is a violation, and it reduces God to something less than who God truly is. So the other main reason is based out of this story. The reason Israel wasn't to make images of God is because where does the story of the Bible begin? With God making images of himself. And so images already exist of God. You don't need to make more images of God. You are one, and you're sitting next to one. You just took communion with many. We're hearing one upstairs right now. You see, as King of the world, God has chosen to partner with and to rule the world through his images, us. His image-bearing creatures who rule the world on his behalf. Okay? And so now in the story, you have humans worshiping this image in the shape of a human. So what does this image represent? Because notice it actually says image. It doesn't say statue. And I think there's definitely a parallel there where those reading this would think of Genesis 1 and the image of God, and oh my gosh, this is an image and this image is not what, there's a difference. I think there's a distinction there, and I do think there is a parallel there. It doesn't say statue, it keeps referring to the statue as an image. And so what does this image represent? Well, this image, it represents human rule. It represents humans creating a nation and an empire and a way of life and culture, and then treating that as if it's God. Welcome to new venues. And here's the thing about this is so extremely dangerous. It's extremely dangerous to our faith. It's extremely dangerous to our relationship with God. It's extremely dangerous for our lives. It's extremely dangerous for our spiritual well-being. When human beings mistake the life that they have created with God itself, worshiping this image is a way of just ousting the Creator. You go, forget the Creator. Look how amazing this is. Look how amazing that is. I remember one time, you guys know I'm a big Disney fan. There's so many cool, epic, just viewpoints and scenery in Disney World everywhere. I remember at one point I was praying one day at Disney World, and I go, God, you actually made all this. You used your created things to make this. Right. And so actually, I praise you. The fact that you were able to create man to make something like this is amazing. And so I thank you, God. But it's easy to not be like that. It's easy to go, okay, wow, look at all the things that man did. And oh my goodness, it's so amazing. But man, God, I don't want to oust God and forget He is the Creator. And so if we continue in our story, right, we're in Daniel 3, now we're in verse 8. You guys with me? Yeah. I know my voice is a little distracting, way more distracting than the noises upstairs. Because you're like, what is wrong with pride? It doesn't sound like him at all. Is that even pride? Yes, it is. So in verse 8, it says, at this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. And that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, Your Majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So his men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If you're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your Majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, Your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. All right. So we'll stop there. We will continue. We are going to go through all of chapter 3 today. But right there, Nebuchadnezzar, he equates himself to a god. He equates himself to God. And so he goes, here, I'm God to you, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. That is who I am. And that, there is no God that can rescue you because I am him. And now if anyone's going to rescue you, it's going to be me. And so you've got to do it this way. And here's the thing, Babylon's God and I'm God, and I hold your life in the balance. So it's your call. Bow down and worship God and worship Babylon, or there's no one that can rescue you. And so look at their response though. Their response is amazing. It's the most respectful rebellion I think I've ever seen. Yeah. Wow. I think we can think of taking a stand, and it probably sounds like, you filthy little pagan blasphemer, you unrighteous, unholy scumbag. You are dirty and pathetic, and how dare you try to defile me, you wicked, nasty, evil man. I'm sure you guys could all come up with some other things. You pimple face, pus nose, whatever. I got into my teenage years there, I apologize. But no, it's just super respectful. We don't believe you're God. We don't believe that Babylon is God. And so whether God saves us from the furnace or not, either way, you're not God, Your Majesty. What? The nature of their resistance is to be very respectful, but also to be offensive. To be completely offensive, respectfully. There's offense in the scriptures all over the place. I know we're in a very highly sensitive, offensive culture right now. They're offending King Nebuchadnezzar right now. They're offending Babylon right now. Respectfully. Respectfully. They're full of conviction and they're full of trust. I think we just fundamentally disagree with who you think you are and who you think Babylon is basically what they say. And it's amazing and it's incredible. And it's something I think we can all learn because we're probably in situations like this a lot. And so moving on into the text, verse 19, it says, "Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious again." He tended to do that. He's furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. Interesting. It's very interesting. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. Okay, now we see why his attitude's changed a little bit. And commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, I like that it says other clothes, okay, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. So I just want to stop here just for a second. Because when a nation's idolize its own power and trusts only itself, and desires just to have power and authority over all things and defines like our authority is greater than any other authority, worthy authority, human life becomes much less valuable. Much less valuable. Human life actually becomes expendable. And so the king, he'll throw away human lives just to destroy the human lives of the people who offended him. These soldiers, expendable. They're serving him. They're under his command. They've probably given up so much to do what they do. They have stories untold that we will never know.
Yeah.
That's true.
But the whole point is that they're nothing to King Nebuchadnezzar. Human life becomes of less worth when nations idolize themselves. And guess what? Human lives will become less valuable to us when we idolize our nations. And when we idolize our type of ideology, if it isn't Jesus.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Daniel 3, moving forward to verse 20, where did I go to? I was at, I read through 23, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, verse 24 here. It says, "Then Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement." Man, he's a very emotional guy. And asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, Your Majesty." It's kind of disgusting that he was even watching. Like, what was he? Like, is there some viewing area? Like, hey, let's watch these guys burn. Like, okay. Verse 25, he said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Interesting. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego," or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, "servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." He went from the sons of God to now he's saying servants of the Most High God. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. Verse 27, "And the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. So that means they weren't bald, okay? The robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Verse 28, then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut to pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can serve in this way." Then the king promised Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. There's the story. It's over. It's not a child story at all.
No.
Not one bit. What's the story about? It's a story about one particular nation. And here's the thing, that nation is Babylon, but the portrait of Babylon in the Bible becomes something, kind of like Voltron. You guys remember Voltron?
Yes.
I found one of my old Voltrons today at my parents' house. Today, I was like, oh, it's Voltron. Back when I was a kid, Voltron was happening. And when I didn't get one of the 5 people that made up Voltron for my birthday, I was in tears because Voltron was the thing. Jackson, you would have loved Voltron if you grew up in the 80s. Trust me. But man, there were these 5 different lions, right? And they were all lions, but when Voltron really needed to wreak havoc and take things into their own hands, what they did is they combined into this ultra robot thing. That is this. You guys remember Voltron?
Yes.
Voltron? No? The whole point is some mega creature that's made up of every other creature, and they combine forces and they become like Babylon. Babylon's taking forces from all these other countries and overthrowing them and taking on as much as they can, and they're becoming this mega nation, right? And in the Bible, Babylon's larger than life. It really is. It appears right on the first pages of the Bible with the Tower of Babylon, Tower of Babel. And Babylon becomes this archetype of the self-exaltation of humanity and human kingdoms. It's why the author of the vision of Revelation at the end of the New Testament will use Babylon to describe their archetype of humanity in conflict and rebellion. This ancient kingdom of Babylon, and we got to be careful, it is an ancient kingdom, becomes an image of everything that's wrong with the human race. And the story is an expo on the danger and the horror and the ridiculous consequences that happens when human kingdoms exalt themselves and when they elevate their national way of life to the place of God's and stamp it with divine authority and go, there's no better thing than this. There's no way it can get any better than this. This is the greatest thing ever. No, it's not. So it raises the question for us as disciples, what are God's people to do? How are God's people to respond in a situation like this? And to respond with a, well, this is just an ancient situation? No. Just like I thought of the statues being primitive, we can't respond in that way. That's folly to respond in that way. People have always, throughout history, found themselves living in different kingdoms that exalt their national identity to divine proportions. And it's a unique question and problem for us living in this modern Western world. Because here's the thing, any of you that are older than 22 years old, which is scanning this room, I think that's the majority of us that are older than 22 years of age. You're associated with a chapter in human history that's not pretty. It's not pretty at all. If you're older than 22, you're born into a century where more humans were murdered in the hands of other humans on a scale and a proportion that's never ever been known in human history. You were born into the bloodiest century in the history of mankind. If you're older than 22, that's part of our legacy to the future. It is. We can't do anything about it. That's just what it is. How did that happen, though? How did that happen? There's lots of main perpetrators, but one of the main perpetrators was when a nation began to exalt itself to a place of a God. That's the 20th century, happening all the time in many different places. So what are God's people to do? How are God's people to respond? Well, it seems very clear from this story what it's advocating, if it's advocating to resist. We've got to resist. We've got to resist. We are in this culture that is all about national identity wherever we go, wherever's going on. I love the UK. The whole thing with the Queen, she was amazing. I got to see her outside of our house once, like when we lived there. It was super cool. But all that stuff that was going on for 10 days, which I was sad. For like 10 days, but it was all national identity stuff. All of it. I really wish I could have gone and visited her at the, as she sat in state, but it didn't happen. But we've got to resist the temptation to equate yours, our national values, and the civic religion and way of life with the one true God in heaven. We've got to resist that temptation. When I say resist, like at all costs. Resist at all costs, because if you and I and we don't, that's a way of compromise. It is. It's a way of compromise. But how are we to resist? What form should God's people's resistance take? And so here's the thing. When we look at this story does not take the form of public protest. There's no public protest. They don't march down to the plain of Dura with signs, God hates idols, how dare you? They don't do that. Do they do that? No. They don't do that. But they are resisting, aren't they? Yeah. They will not bow down. When everyone else bows down, nations and other languages, when they all bow down, they are not. Their resistance it's just peaceful resistance. It's non-participation in national identity resistance. They don't even draw attention to themselves. They're not like, hey, we're not bowing down because you're a dirty pagan. No. They get ratted out. Man, come on, tattletales, rattling outers. Come on, man. Their peaceful non-participation didn't mean withdrawal either. I'm not saying withdrawal from society. I'm not saying, hey, let's move to the desert plains and let's start this alternate community. No, they didn't do that. What did they do for a living, these three guys? What did they do? They had government jobs. They had government jobs. They served the kingdom of Babylon, making it the best place that they could possibly help make it. That's what they did. That's what we need to do. Make Dayton the best city in Ohio. Make Dayton the best city for the gospel to spread in all the world. Not just Ohio. All the world. These men, they're fully engaged in Babylon. Are we fully engaged in Dayton? Yeah. Or are we just critical of it and think, it's Rust Belt or olden days, NCR and blah, blah, blah. I get it. I get there was some better times probably. It's still a great place. Yeah. Still a great place. And what are we going to do about it? If it was better then, what are we doing to make it better? What are we doing to make it better? We're Christians. Peacefully, we resist. I think they don't participate in the national idolatry. And here's the thing: is this is kind of it's a nice edge of faithfulness of God's people in exile. They dress like Babylonians. They talk like Babylonians. They work for Babylonia, but they don't participate as Babylonians. Are we participating as Christians? Are we participating as followers of Jesus? Or are we participating as Americans? Are we participating as Daytonians and Ohioans? And that's the first way of how to resist. Okay? In their peaceful demeanor and in their non-violent resistance, they are putting down and throwing jabs and darts at people. Are you guys with me? Church, are you guys with me? Yeah. There's no jabs, there's no darts. Your Majesty, King. Proper titles, proper respect. There's no jabs. There's no darts. There's nothing. There's none of that. There's none of that. There's no bumbling you-know-who. There's none of that. I get sick and tired of the late night talk shows making fun of our leaders.
Yeah.
It's disrespectful.
Yeah.
And everyone just laughs at it.
Mm-hmm.
Big joke. Why don't you try that? You go for it. Why don't you take that seat? How are we doing? How are we doing? Jesus loves those individuals just as much as he loves us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Amen.
I think it's powerful. It's powerful that this is the way they approach the resistance. As Jesus covenant people, it means, first of all, a resistance of national idolatries, but not a withdrawal in which nation we find ourselves in. Think about our brothers and sisters right now in Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah.
That's awkward. Think about how they're going to have to fight and make it about Jesus and not Ukraine and Russia.
Right.
I heard this morning that Ukraine is giving out iodine pills to the kids of schools because they're afraid that nuclear warfare is going to come their way. And we got to pray that doesn't happen. But then brothers and sisters are like, hey, yeah, you dropped a nuclear bomb on it. Like, that's intense. We don't have that intensity, guys. We don't have that. We got to pray for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine and Russia.
Amen.
That Jesus is Lord and they follow Jesus. We don't withdraw in the nation that we find ourselves in. The fact that we are Americans doesn't define our identity.
Right.
Just like it didn't for these three. First and foremost, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. We are followers of Jesus. And so I identify myself by my relationship to God through Jesus, and we need to do the same. We all do that because we said Jesus is Lord.
That's right.
And my mission is to seek God's kingdom and to love God and to love other people, even if we disagree with their ideology. That's how Jesus defined what it meant to follow him. And so, you know what? I'm going to seek the best for my community and my nation. But I do so out of completely different motivation. Not because I think my nation is the best nation, or it's because I live that my nation exists under the rule and authority of God, and that I'm called to contribute to it as one of image-bearing human, as a follower of Jesus. That's not why I say, oh, America's great. America's great because God thinks it's great, because God believes in it. But God also thinks that about Canada, and Mexico, and Aruba, and Russia, and Ukraine. He's got tons and tons of people that he wants to follow him and become Christians.
Right.
And so, guys, who is our God? Who is our God?
Come on.
I think we're all here because God is our God.
Yes.
And we got to resist the temptation for God to not become our God and other things in a highly volatile political society right now. I think it's perfect that 2022, here we are going through Daniel 3. Let's be faithful to God because he is our God. And let's live this way in Dayton. Amen.
Amen.